The night Alexander Hayes walked back into my life, he came carrying a DNA test and a future he thought he could claim with a signature. What he didn't know was that the little boy sleeping in the corner of my bakery was the only reason I had survived losing him. It was 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and the last batch of cinnamon rolls had finally cooled on the wire racks behind me. The scent of butter, sugar, and fresh bread still lingered in the air while I wiped flour from the counter with tired hands. My feet ached after a 14-hour shift. My back hurt. My coffee had gone cold 3 hours earlier. But none of that mattered because Noah was asleep. My 5-year-old son sat curled up in a booth near the front window, wrapped in a blue blanket covered with tiny baseballs. One small hand rested beneath his cheek. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that always made the world feel manageable. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, everything felt quiet, safe, ordinary. Then the bell above the front door chimed. I looked up automatically, expecting a delivery driver or maybe a customer who had lost track of time. Instead, 3 men stepped inside. The first wore a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The second carried a leather briefcase. The third remained near the door, silent and watchful. My stomach tightened before I even saw the face of the man in the center. Some people enter a room. Others change the temperature of it. Alexander Hayes had always done the second. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 6 years disappeared. 6 years of unanswered questions. 6 years of birthdays he had never attended. 6 years of watching Noah grow up without knowing the truth about his father. Alexander looked older now. More controlled. More powerful. Silver touched the edges of his dark hair. The sharp lines of his jaw seemed harder than I remembered. But his eyes were exactly the same. Cold gray. Impossible to forget. His gaze moved across the bakery before settling on me. There was no recognition at first. Just professional focus. Like I was another item on a schedule. Another meeting to complete before midnight. Then, he placed a sealed envelope on the counter between us. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. I stared at it without touching it. "Emily Carter?" he asked. His voice was calm. Precise. The same voice that once made me believe promises about forever. I swallowed hard. "You already know who I am." His expression didn't change. The man with the briefcase opened it and removed several documents. Alexander slid the top page toward me. "I came because of a DNA test." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because I was surprised. I had known this day might come. Every mother who keeps a secret eventually imagines the moment it stops being one. My fingers trembled as I looked toward Noah. He was still asleep, still dreaming, still unaware that the world was shifting beneath him. Alexander followed my gaze. For the first time, his eyes landed on the little boy near the window. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even recognition. Then silence filled the bakery. Heavy, unavoidable. And in that silence I realized he hadn't come looking for me at all. He had come for the child. He had come for his heir. For several seconds nobody spoke. The rain continued tapping against the windows while the refrigerator behind the counter hummed softly. Alexander stood perfectly still, staring at Noah as if the rest of the world had disappeared. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over the years. Sometimes he was angry. Sometimes he was shocked. Sometimes he walked away without looking back. But I had never imagined silence. Real silence. The kind that settles into your chest and makes every heartbeat feel louder. Finally, Alexander looked back at me. "How old is he?" he asked. His voice sounded different now. Less corporate. Less controlled. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. 5. The answer seemed to hit him harder than I expected. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes moved back toward Noah. 5 years. 5 birthdays. 5 Christmas mornings. 5 first days of school. 5 years he had never known existed. The lawyer beside him shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hayes," he began quietly. Alexander raised one hand. The lawyer immediately stopped talking. I remembered that gesture. Alexander had always been able to silence a room without raising his voice. It used to impress me. Tonight it only made old memories hurt. "Why did you never contact me?" he asked. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. The question itself felt absurd. I did. The words came out sharper than I intended. His eyes narrowed. What? I contacted you 6 years ago. My throat tightened. More than once. The bakery suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe inside. I called. I sent letters. I even showed up at your office. Confusion appeared across his face. Genuine confusion. Not guilt. Not avoidance. Confusion. That is impossible, he said. I never received anything. I stared at him. Every painful memory came rushing back. Standing outside the Hayes corporate tower with swollen eyes and trembling hands. Leaving messages that were never returned. Watching receptionists politely tell me that Mr. Hayes was unavailable. Going home every night believing he had chosen not to answer. Believing he had chosen not to care. Well, I whispered. Somebody made sure you never got them. The lawyer exchanged a glance with the man near the door. I noticed it immediately. Alexander noticed it too. His expression hardened. Marcus. The single word carried enough authority to make the lawyer straighten instantly. I want every communication record from 6 years ago reviewed. Marcus Reed nodded. Yes, sir. Something changed in the room after that. A tiny shift. Small enough that most people would have missed it. But I saw it. For the first time since walking into the bakery, Alexander was no longer looking at me like a problem to solve. He was looking at me like part of a mystery. Then Noah stirred beneath his blanket. My entire body reacted instantly. I turned toward him as his small eyes blinked open. He looked sleepy and confused. Mom, he mumbled. I crossed the room before he could say anything else. Hey, sweetheart. He rubbed his eyes and glanced toward the strangers standing near the counter. Children notice everything. Noah especially. His gaze settled. On Alexander. Neither of them looked away. I felt my pulse quicken. There was something unsettling about seeing them in the same room. The same gray eyes. The same shape of their smile. The same stubborn tilt of their chin. Noah pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders. Who is that? He asked softly. The question hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Life-changing. Alexander looked at me. Waiting. The lawyer looked at me. Waiting. Even the rain seemed to pause outside the window. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized the truth was no longer mine alone to protect. My mouth went dry. Noah sat there wrapped in his blanket, looking from me to Alexander with the simple curiosity only children possess. He had no idea that one answer could change everything. I knelt beside him and brushed a strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. His name is Alexander, I said softly. Noah studied him for another second. Do you know him? Children always ask the hardest questions. I glanced up. Alexander had not moved. For a man who controlled billion-dollar companies and boardrooms full of executives, he suddenly looked uncertain. Yes, I answered. A long time ago. Noah seemed satisfied with that for the moment. He yawned and pulled the blanket tighter around himself. Then he looked directly at Alexander again. Why are you here so late? The question landed harder than any accusation could have. Alexander opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time since I had known him, he appeared completely unprepared. Finally he said, I came because I needed to meet someone important. Noah blinked. Who? A faint smile touched Alexander's face. Small. Almost invisible. You. The bakery fell silent again. Noah looked confused but not frightened. Children had a way of accepting moments adults could not understand. He simply nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Then he slid off the booth seat and padded toward the counter in his socks. My heart nearly stopped. Every protective instinct I possessed came alive at once. Yet I stayed where I was. Noah stopped a few feet away from Alexander and tilted his head. Standing that close, the resemblance became impossible to ignore. The same eyes, the same stubborn posture, the same thoughtful expression whenever they were trying to figure something out. Alexander noticed it too. I saw it happen. His entire expression softened. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal something human beneath all the control. Mom says staring is rude, Noah informed him seriously. The lawyer looked away to hide a smile. Alexander nodded. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Noah did not hesitate. Not for a second. The certainty in his voice wrapped around my heart. Alexander lowered his gaze briefly before looking back at him. I believe that. Something painful moved through his eyes. Regret, maybe. Loss. Years that could never be recovered. Noah climbed back into the booth and reached for the coloring book he always kept nearby. Within seconds he was focused on crayons and unfinished drawings. Children could move on from life-changing moments faster than adults ever could. I stood and faced Alexander again. You should leave. His attention shifted from Noah to me. Emily. It is late. He has school tomorrow. I am not here to disrupt his life. The words almost made me angry. You walked into his life with a DNA report and 2 strangers. What exactly would you call that? He accepted the criticism without arguing. That surprised me more than anything else tonight. Alexander Hayes had never been known for backing down. Yet he simply nodded once. Fair point. Marcus cleared his throat quietly. Sir, perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow. Alexander remained silent for several seconds. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a business card. He placed it carefully on the counter. You have my direct number. I looked at the card but did not touch it. I do not need it. Maybe not today. His eyes moved toward Noah one final time. But there are things we need to understand. Both of us. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he had lost that right years ago. But the truth was already standing 10 feet away coloring a rocket ship with blue crayons. And neither of us could pretend otherwise anymore. As Alexander turned toward the door, his phone suddenly vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The change in his expression was immediate. Cold. Focused. Alert. Marcus noticed it too. What happened? Alexander read the message once more. Then his gaze shifted toward Noah. I think, he said quietly, we may have a problem. The air inside the bakery seemed to change. 1 second we were standing in the aftermath of a conversation that should have happened years ago. The next, something invisible settled over the room. Alexander looked at the phone screen once more before slipping it back into his pocket. His expression revealed almost nothing, but I remembered him well enough to know something was wrong. What problem? I asked. He hesitated. That alone made my stomach tighten. Alexander Hayes was not a man who hesitated. Marcus stepped closer. Sir. Alexander ignored the question. His eyes moved toward the front window where rain streaked across the glass in silver lines. Then he looked back at me. How many people know Noah as my son? I stared at him. Almost nobody. Think carefully. I have thought carefully for 5 years. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Nobody knew because there was nothing to tell. You did not know. Your company did not know. The world did not know. He nodded slowly. And the DNA test? The sample was submitted through a private medical program after Noah needed additional genetic screening last month. Marcus frowned. That should have remained confidential. Alexander's jaw tightened. Apparently it did not. A chill moved through me. It had nothing to do with the weather outside. What are you saying? For several seconds he said nothing. Then he walked toward the counter and lowered his voice. The report was accessed by someone who should not have had access to it. My pulse quickened. Who? We do not know yet. Noah continued coloring at the booth behind us, completely unaware of the tension spreading through the room. I watched him carefully. His small hand moved across the page as he added blue flames to the bottom of his rocket ship. Everything about him looked normal, innocent, safe. Yet suddenly I felt as though the walls of the bakery were not enough to protect him. You think someone is interested in Noah? I asked quietly. I think someone is interested in information. Alexander's eyes met mine. And Noah happens to be connected to that information. Rain rattled softly against the windows. Somewhere outside, a car drove through a puddle. The ordinary sounds felt strangely distant. This is exactly why I stayed away from your world, I whispered. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps. Emily. No. I shook my head. Do not do that. Do what? Say my name like you still have a right to it. Silence followed. heavy and uncomfortable. Marcus looked away. Even the man near the door suddenly found the floor interesting. Alexander accepted the words without defending himself. That surprised me again. 6 years ago he would have argued. Tonight he simply absorbed the blow. You are right, he said quietly. The answer caught me off guard. Then Noah's voice broke the tension. Mom. I turned immediately. Yeah, sweetheart. He held up the coloring book. Do you think rockets can reach the moon in one day? The question was so wonderfully normal that my chest hurt. I smiled despite everything. Probably not in one day. Noah sighed dramatically. That is disappointing. To my surprise, Alexander spoke. The Apollo missions took about 3 days. Noah's eyes widened. Really? Really? For the first time that night, I saw genuine interest replace uncertainty in Noah's face. He slid out of the booth. How do you know that? A faint smile appeared on Alexander's face. I like space when I was your age too. Noah considered this carefully. Then he nodded once as if filing away important information. Watching them stand there felt strange. Familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Like looking at a photograph from a future I had never expected to exist. Then Alexander's phone vibrated again. He glanced down. The small trace of warmth disappeared immediately. His eyes hardened. Emily, he said quietly, I do not think you and Noah should be alone tonight. Every protective instinct inside me rose at once. No. The answer came before I could stop it. Alexander did not react. He simply stood there watching me, Rain, reflecting across the windows behind him. Emily, listen to me. I have listened enough tonight. I grabbed Noah's backpack from beneath the counter and started stuffing crayons, books, and his favorite stuffed astronaut into it. The familiar routine steadied my hands. You walk into my bakery after 6 years. Tell me someone accessed private records, and now you are telling me not to stay in my own home? I am telling you I do not like coincidences. His voice remained calm, controlled. The DNA report was accessed less than 48 hours after it appeared in the system. Then someone began searching for information connected to both of you. My stomach tightened. Searching how? Marcus answered this time. Addresses. Employment records. School enrollment data. The words felt like ice water down my spine. I looked toward Noah. He was busy putting away his coloring book, completely unaware that adults were discussing his life as if it were a business report. Who would do that? I asked. We are trying to find out. Alexander's eyes never left mine. Until we do, I would rather assume caution is necessary. I hated how reasonable he sounded. I hated that part of me believed him. Most of all, I hated that I could no longer tell where old resentment ended and present fear began. Noah slipped his small backpack onto his shoulders. Are we going somewhere? He asked. I forced a smile. Maybe for one night. His eyes lit up instantly. To a child, unexpected changes often felt like adventures. To a mother, they felt like risks. Alexander glanced at his watch. My driver is waiting. Of course he is. The sarcasm escaped before I could stop it. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite amusement. Just recognition. Once upon a time I had been one of the few people willing to challenge him. Apparently that had not changed. 20 minutes later the bakery lights were off. The smell of cinnamon and fresh bread lingered behind us as I locked the front door. Rain still fell softly from the dark sky. The street looked nearly empty. Noah held my hand while we walked toward the black SUV parked at the curb. The vehicle seemed enormous beneath the streetlights. Noah stared at it with wide eyes. Wow. Do not get used to it, I muttered. Alexander opened the rear door himself. That surprised me almost as much as everything else tonight. Noah climbed inside first. I followed more slowly. The leather seats were warm. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Everything about it felt like another world. A world I had worked very hard to avoid. The drive began in silence. City lights blurred across rain-covered windows while Noah pressed his face against the glass, fascinated by everything. After several minutes he pointed toward the skyline. Mom, look. I followed his finger. Far ahead, a tower of white light disappeared into the clouds. Alexander noticed it too. That is Hayes Tower, he said quietly. Noah's eyes widened. You built that? Alexander hesitated. Then he nodded. With a lot of help. Noah looked genuinely impressed. That is awesome. I stared out the window and said nothing, because somewhere between the bakery and the city skyline, something impossible had started happening. The stranger who had arrived carrying a DNA report was slowly becoming real to my son, and that terrified me far more than any mystery waiting ahead. By the time we reached the estate, it was nearly midnight. The gates opened silently, revealing a long driveway lined with trees wrapped in soft white lights. Noah pressed his face against the window again. This place is huge. I could not disagree. The house looked less like a home and more like something from a magazine cover. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows. Stone walls stretched across the property. Everything appeared polished, perfect, controlled. Just like Alexander. The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a covered entrance. Before I could open my door, someone stepped outside. A woman. Tall. Elegant. Perfectly dressed despite the late hour. Her blonde hair fell neatly across one shoulder. Diamonds caught the light at her ears. She smiled at first. Then she saw me. Then Noah. The smile vanished so quickly I almost wondered if I had imagined it. Alexander stepped out of the vehicle. Victoria. Her eyes moved immediately to him. You were supposed to be back hours ago. Her voice sounded pleasant enough, but something underneath it felt strained. Alexander did not answer right away. Instead he opened Noah's door. Careful. Noah climbed out and looked around with wide eyes. Wow. Victoria stared at him, then at me, then back at Alexander. The silence lasted 1 second too long. Who are they? She asked. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Guests. It was not a lie. It was not the truth either. Victoria's gaze lingered on Noah. Something cold flashed behind her smile. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it. Mothers notice things, especially when it involves their children. Of course, she said. Welcome. The words sounded rehearsed. Inside, the house felt even larger. Marble floors reflected warm light from crystal chandeliers overhead. Noah's sneakers squeaked softly as he walked. He looked around with open fascination. Mom, this place has echoes. His voice bounced off distant walls. For the first time all night I laughed. A real laugh. Small but real. Noah grinned at the sound. Alexander watched us quietly. Something unreadable moved through his eyes. A housekeeper appeared carrying folded blankets. Another staff member offered hot chocolate for Noah. The efficiency felt almost unreal. My entire apartment could probably fit inside the entry hall. Victoria stood near the staircase observing everything. Her attention kept returning to Noah. Finally, she looked directly at Alexander. Can I speak with you? The request sounded polite. The meaning underneath it did not. Alexander nodded once. Marcus will show Emily and Noah to their rooms. Rooms. I repeated. This is one night. That is the plan. His gaze held mine for a second longer. Something about it felt reassuring despite myself. Then he followed Victoria down a side hallway. Noah tugged gently on my sleeve. Mom. Yeah. I do not think that lady likes us. I nearly stopped walking. Children notice everything. Sometimes more than adults do. I glanced toward the hallway where Victoria had disappeared. Why would you say that? Noah shrugged. She smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. Marcus made a sound that suspiciously resembled a cough hiding a laugh. I looked down at my son. His expression was completely serious. And suddenly I had the uncomfortable feeling that Noah might be absolutely right. Somewhere deeper inside the house, a door closed. The sound echoed faintly through the quiet halls. I did not know it yet, but behind that closed door, answers from 6 years ago were finally beginning to surface. Sleep should have come easily after everything that happened. It did not. Noah fell asleep within minutes, stretched across a bed larger than the one we shared at home whenever thunderstorms rolled through the city. I sat beside him for a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. The guest suite was beautiful. Warm lighting, fresh flowers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark grounds. Yet none of it felt comfortable. Luxury could not compete with peace of mind. A Around 1 in the morning, I finally left the room and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I wandered toward the staircase, hoping a glass of water might settle my thoughts. Halfway down the hall, voices stopped me. Alexander and Marcus. The door to a nearby study was not fully closed. I should have walked away. Instead, I froze. "You are absolutely certain?" Alexander asked. His voice sounded lower than usual. "Tired." Marcus answered immediately. "The records match. Multiple communications were intercepted before reaching you." My pulse quickened. I moved closer without making a sound. Papers rustled inside the room. Then Marcus spoke again. 3 letters from Emily. 2 voicemail requests. 1 in-person visitor report from Hayes Tower Security. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that changes everything. "And none of it reached my desk?" Alexander asked. "No." Marcus paused. "Someone stopped every one of them." My hand tightened around the stair railing. For 6 years I had believed Alexander ignored me. For 6 years I had carried that rejection like a stone inside my chest. Now that stone was beginning to crack. "Who authorized it?" Alexander asked. Marcus hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. "Marcus. We found a pattern connected to Victoria Sloane's former chief of staff." My breath caught. Inside the study, nobody spoke for several seconds. "Explain." Marcus took a breath. "At the time, Victoria was heavily involved in your public schedule, communications, and personal correspondence. Several employees reported unusual instructions, visitor restrictions, message filtering, contact screening." My heart hammered so loudly I was certain they could hear it through the door. "You are telling me someone deliberately made sure Emily could not reach me?" "That is exactly what I am saying." Another long silence followed. Then I heard something I never expected. Regret. Real regret. It was there in Alexander's voice when he finally spoke. 6 years. The words were barely above a whisper. 6 years. Suddenly I understood. He had not known. The realization should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it hurt even more. Because anger is easier than grief. Anger gives you someone to blame. Grief leaves you staring at lost years that can never return. I stepped back before they could discover me listening. My thoughts were spinning when another voice reached me from downstairs. Female. Sharp. Controlled. "Victoria." I moved toward the staircase and looked down. She stood near the entrance hall speaking on her phone. "No," she said quietly. "I do not care how it happened. Fix it." Her tone sent a chill through me. The boy was never supposed to be found. My breath stopped. Victoria turned slightly, unaware I was standing above her. "I do not want mistakes right now. Not with the wedding this close." "Wing." The word landed like a stone. For one foolish moment I had forgotten. Alexander had a future planned, a life already arranged. And somewhere inside that carefully arranged future, Noah and I were never supposed to exist. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Victoria's voice again. The boy was never supposed to be found. The words repeated endlessly in my mind. By sunrise, exhaustion sat heavy behind my eyes, but fear kept me awake. Noah, meanwhile, slept peacefully beneath a mountain of blankets. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting gold across the room. For a few seconds, watching him breathe, I almost convinced myself everything would be fine. Then a soft knock interrupted the silence. "Mom!" Noah mumbled sleepily. "Come in," I called. The door opened. Alexander stood there holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of pancakes shaped like stars. The sight was so unexpected that I forgot how to speak. He looked equally uncomfortable carrying breakfast. Noah sat upright immediately. "Those are for me?" Alexander glanced at the tray. "I was told most 5-year-olds prefer pancakes over business meetings." Noah grinned. "That is true." Against my better judgment, I almost smiled. Alexander set the tray down near the bed. Noah immediately attacked the pancakes with the enthusiasm only children possess. For a few minutes, nobody discussed DNA reports, missing years, or intercepted letters. We simply watched Noah eat breakfast. The normalcy felt strange. Fragile. Precious. Then Alexander looked at me. We need to talk. The warmth vanished from the room. I nodded toward Noah. Not here. 10 minutes later, we sat alone in a sunlit sitting room overlooking the gardens. Fresh coffee steamed between us. Neither of us touched it. Alexander placed a folder on the table. My stomach tightened immediately. Marcus finished the preliminary investigation. I stared at the folder. And his jaw tightened. You were telling the truth. The words landed harder than I expected. For years I had imagined hearing them. Yet now that they finally existed, they brought no satisfaction. Only sadness. The letters existed. The calls existed. Your visitor records existed. His eyes held mine. Every attempt you made to contact me was intercepted. I looked away toward the gardens. Roses swayed gently in the morning breeze. Somewhere outside birds sang. The world looked beautiful. Felt cruel. I spent years believing you chose not to answer. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. Alexander lowered his gaze briefly. I spent years believing you chose to disappear. Silence stretched between us. 6 years of misunderstanding sitting quietly at the same table. Finally I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Victoria. He did not deny it. The evidence points in that direction. My chest tightened. Does she know about Noah? She knows now. His expression hardened. And she is not happy about it. I remembered the phone call. The boy was never supposed to be found. For the first time, I told Alexander exactly what I had overheard the night before. I watched every trace of color disappear from his face. When I finished speaking, the room felt colder somehow. She said that? He asked quietly. Every word. Alexander leaned back in his chair. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. This one carried disappointment, betrayal, the collapse of something he had trusted. Then a small voice echoed from the doorway. Dad. Both of us froze. Noah stood there holding his stuffed astronaut. His eyes widened instantly. One hand covered his mouth. Oops. My heart nearly stopped. Alexander looked equally stunned. Noah stared between us, suddenly embarrassed. I did not mean to say that out loud. For one impossible second, nobody moved. Then Alexander smiled. A real smile this time. Small. Honest. Human. And something inside the room changed forever. The room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then another. Noah's face turned bright red. He looked at the floor as if he wished it would open and swallow him whole. Sorry, he mumbled. I know I am supposed to say Mr. Hayes. Alexander did not move. For a man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, he suddenly looked completely speechless. Then he slowly stood and walked toward Noah. My entire body tensed automatically. Old habits. Protective instincts. But Alexander simply knelt so they were eye level. You do not have to apologize. Noah looked up cautiously. I do not. Alexander shook his head. No. Something softened in his voice. Something I had never heard before. Actually, I think I liked hearing it. Noah's smile appeared slowly. Careful. Hopeful. It was the smile of a little boy testing whether a door was really open before stepping through it. Watching them, I felt something unexpected loosen inside my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of peace. The rest of the day unfolded differently than I imagined. There were no lawyers. No custody discussions. No negotiations. Instead, Noah spent an hour showing Alexander every drawing in his coloring book. He explained his favorite planets. His dream of becoming an astronaut. His belief that dinosaurs would have loved roller coasters. Alexander listened to every word as though each sentence mattered. Maybe because it did. Years had been stolen from both of them. Every minute suddenly felt precious. By late afternoon, Marcus arrived with final reports. Victoria had left the estate hours earlier. Several executives connected to the communication interference had already resigned. The truth was no longer hidden. 6 years of lies had finally collapsed beneath their own weight. I found Alexander standing alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens as the sun began to set. Golden light stretched across the property. The air smelled faintly of roses. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he handed me a small folder. Inside were copies of the letters I had written years ago. Letters I thought had disappeared forever. My hands trembled as I recognized my own handwriting. The hopes. The fears. The young woman who believed she was writing to the man she loved. I read every one of them this morning, Alexander said quietly. I swallowed hard. And he stared toward the horizon. And I realized I missed the most important years of my life. The honesty in his voice hurt more than excuses ever could. He turned toward me. I came looking for answers. I thought I was solving a problem. His eyes met mine. Instead, I found a family that should have been mine all along. Tears burned behind my eyes. I looked away before they could fall. You cannot get those years back. I know. He nodded slowly. That is what makes them valuable. The sun dipped lower. Somewhere behind us, Noah laughed at something one of the staff members said. The sound drifted across the garden like music. Alexander listened to it too. Then he took a slow breath. Emily, I am not asking you to forget what happened. I remained silent. I am not asking for trust one have not earned. Another pause. And I am not asking you to stay. Finally I looked at him. What are you asking? His expression softened. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just a man who finally understood what he had lost. A chance. The word hung between us. Simple. Honest. Real. Behind us, Noah burst through the terrace doors carrying his stuffed astronaut. Mom. Dad. Come look at this. Neither of us corrected him. We simply turned toward the sound of his voice. And for the first time in 6 years, the future did not feel like something to fear. It felt like something waiting to be built.